No matter what your real estate agent tells you, homeownership isn't for everybody. And in this video, we're going to discuss why you shouldn't buy a home in the coming year. Because even though, yes, there are a lot of really great reasons to own a home, and the majority of people probably should at some point in their lifetime, there are also a lot of valid reasons not to own one, especially when you have a market that is highly volatile like the one we're in right now. So let's get into it. Let's discuss the 5 reasons why you might regret buying a home this year. And some of this has to do with market forces, and some of it has to do with personal circumstances. But no matter what way you look at it, it's important to look at both sides of the home buying scenario, whether you should or whether you shouldn't. Doing so could prevent you from making a massive mistake when it comes to buying. And by the way, the last reason in this video is by far the most important, so make sure you stay to the end to see that one. And yes, I'm one of those people who earns my living when people buy homes, but I'm also cognizant of the fact that buying a home isn't necessarily for everyone. Okay, so let's start with the first reason why you probably shouldn't buy a home this year. And that is if in your market, it is significantly cheaper to rent than it is to own a home. So in other words, if you're looking to buy a home and you can rent the exact same type of property for significantly less than you can buy it for, when you account for all the mortgage costs and the taxes and everything else, well, then it probably doesn't make sense to buy. And here's the reason why. A market where rents are significantly lower than the cost of ownership is a market that is out of balance, because in general, it should be cheaper to own a home than it should be to rent it. And in times where the inverse of that is true, it's usually an indicator that the market needs to come back to balance. And either one of two things is going to happen. Either rents are going to come up, or more often, housing prices are going to come down, which means that while you wait for those housing prices to come down, you can start banking money. And when the market eventually shifts to a point where it becomes cheaper to own than it does to rent, you take that money, you buy that home, and then you have it for the next 15 to 25 years. Then you end up having complete control over your home, you have a vehicle that will increase your net worth, and you've probably purchased it at the right price rather than a price that is overinflated. Oh, and let me be clear on this. I do think that everyone at some point should own a home, because it is clear that when people who buy homes, when it makes sense to, are significantly better off in the long run than those who don't. I'll link to a video right here that talks about exactly that. Now, the second reason why you may not want to buy a home this year is if you have an uncertain career path. Maybe the employer you work for is starting to do layoffs, and the economy is not looking like it's going to support the job that you have. Or maybe you're just looking at changing career paths and you want to try something different. Well, if any of these scenarios are true, it may not be the right time to buy a home. And the reasons for this are obvious. If you lose your job, you can't pay for your home, and subsequently that could be a bad thing. And in addition to that, if you're thinking about a different career, not having the obligation to live in the exact same place where you live right now can be an advantage when it comes to applying for jobs. Because if you end up getting a job at some place that is an hour or 2 hours away from where you live, there's a high likelihood that you will want to relocate to be closer to that job. If you own a home and the market turns, you won't necessarily have the ability to do that. So if you think that there might be a change in your career status, you may want to hold off on those buying decisions. Now, the one caveat to this is if you're thinking about becoming self-employed and you're relatively certain that you will be successful in your self-employment, you may want to purchase a home before you take that leap, because once you become self-employed, it will be harder for you to get a mortgage, which means you may have a couple of years that you have to wait in order to be able to buy. But at the same time, if you're looking to switch from being employed to being self-employed, well, you're taking a risk, and maybe you want to mitigate that by not having the obligation to have to make a mortgage payment every month. Now, the third reason why you may not want to buy a property this year is if you're uncertain about the long-term prospects of owning that home. So in other words, if you don't think that you can live in it for the next 5, 10 to 15 years, you may not want to make that purchase decision. The reason why is because if the market turns and you aren't able to sell that property easily, well, you may be stuck in a property that doesn't meet your current needs. Or I guess in this case, we're more talking about your future needs. So for example, let's say you're planning on maybe getting married or having kids, or you have elderly parents that you may need to move into your home in order to take care of them. Well, in all of those scenarios, if you aren't able to purchase a property that will be suitable for your needs for the long term, you may want to avoid making that leap. And in addition to that, if a future move to another city is something that you're contemplating, the same goes. You may not want to make that purchasing decision so that you have the flexibility to make that move when you want to make it. Now, the fourth reason why you may not want to purchase a home this year is if you can't afford it. And yeah, I know you're looking at me, you're going, hey, Nolan, if I can get approved for a mortgage, I can afford it, right? Well, not necessarily. Because often when you get approved for a mortgage, they're approving you at the maximum mortgage amount that you can afford. And let me tell you right now, from personal experience, that maximum amount that the bank thinks that you can afford may not necessarily be what you can actually afford. Because lenders will often qualify you for payments that equal up to 45% of your income. Now, where that could become a problem is if you haven't considered things like taxes, you haven't considered things like other debts or other obligations that you may have to pay, and you realize all of a sudden that the government's taking the large majority of your money for taxes, and the bank is taking the other large majority of your money in order for you to own that home. Well, there may not be any money left at the end of the month. And believe me, a lot of people find themselves in this exact scenario, which means when it comes to being able to afford a home, you should probably be looking at no more than 25 to 35% of your income going towards your housing costs. And you should also, when buying a home, make sure that you have at least 6 to 12 months worth of additional savings over and above your down payment, so that if something does go wrong, like a job loss or something going bad in the economy, you're able to maintain that property and pay for the mortgage over the long run. Being able to afford a home is more than just getting approved for the mortgage. You need to not only be able to afford it in the eyes of the bank, but you need to be able to actually make the payments and continue to make them in the event that something goes wrong. And last but not least, and this is by far the most important reason why you shouldn't be buying a home in the next year, is if you are trying to time the market. Because if you're one of those people who is looking at the forecasts and going, well, I think interest rates are going to come down, which means the market should do this, so I'm going to buy at exactly this point and try to get the best deal, I have news for you. You're probably not going to get the best deal, and the chances of you timing the bottom of the market are probably slim to none. I mean, just look at all the people in 2020 who thought, hey, I'll wait for there to be some deals. The pandemic is going to make real estate really, really cheap. And those same people, in a lot of cases, either got caught up in bidding wars in 2022 or are still not in the market. So don't be one of those people who tries to time the market. Your buying decision for real estate should be just like your buying decisions for everything else. Which means, first of all, you should be looking at whether or not you can actually afford to buy the property. 2, you should be looking at whether or not you can afford to own it long term. And 3, you should just be looking at overall if it makes sense for you to own it. Because I'll tell you this right now, forecasts are notoriously wrong. Economists hardly ever get it right, which means if you're looking at all the data on what's expected to happen, like interest rates coming down, and that doesn't actually happen, well, you could have missed an opportunity, or you could find yourself in a situation where housing prices continue to go up and you've just waited longer to purchase the home than you probably should have. And you might get priced completely out of the market. Oh, and if you want to see another video where I talk in depth about the problem with forecasts and why you shouldn't be using them to make your home buying decision, make sure you check out this video right here.